Hello once again. Today's video is going to be another installment on my series of exploring the Northern Telecom Norstar office telephone system, or private branch exchange system if you will. This is the latest installment in a series of videos I've done starting about a year and a half ago, in which I purchased that Norstar PBX as well as two phones for it. I learned how to put it together, I tested it for the first time, and now I want to make a series of videos explaining how to use the system, how to administer it, how to configure it, set it up to do what you want, exploring all the different things a Norstar system can do, stuff like that. And I'm pretty excited because it was just recently that I finally set this thing back up. It's been sitting in the box for several months since I moved back here from my old apartment, and I've finally got it set up, and I've actually got it set up pretty well. I've got the PBX sitting right here, and I've got my two Norstar telephones mounted on my shelves here, which works pretty well. They're there pretty sturdy. And yeah, it's been several months since I touched this thing, so I'm really excited to get back to using it and making videos about it. And recently, for the first time ever, I now have this system connected to an outside line. That telephone line coming up that floor register from the basement is connected to our telephone service, and I have it running into the PBX there. So now, I hit line 1, which is what it's connected to. We get a dial tone. And it actually works. I've tested it fully. I can make calls. When somebody calls here, I have this phone set to ring. And yeah, it's fully functional now on an outside line, and that is super cool. Ever since I've gotten this thing, I've been wanting to do that, and I've never been able to try it on an outside line because in my apartment I didn't have one. So yeah, really cool to finally get that set up. So in previous videos, I've explained what the Norstar system is for and what office telephone systems in general are for. I gave a history of Northern Telecom and the various PBX systems that they sold over the years. I also gave an explanation of how POTS telephone service in general works, just a high-level overview of that. I gave sort of a high-level overview of how the phones and the outside line connect to the PBX. And in today's video, I'm going to dig a little deeper into how exactly the phones connect to the PBS, how you sort of figure out how to do that, and what exactly you connect to what, and stuff like that. So I'm going to explain that, and I'm going to go over the very basic functions of the Norstar system. What are the very first, very basic things you can do once you have the telephones hooked up and everything's running? Norstar's been initialized to the factory default configuration. What can you do right off the bat to start playing with it? So that's what we'll be going over in today's video. Now before I begin, I am going to mention I'm making these videos for hobbyist use only. Somebody who wants to tinker with this stuff, has gotten a hold of a Norstar system, wants to figure out how to use it, how to get it running. This video and all the videos in this series are for that purpose. They are not for professional use. I don't intend these to be for professional use, and I don't recommend that they're used for professional use. Some of the stuff I explained in the video may absolutely be applicable, but I don't recommend it. I'm not going to provide any support for your Norstar system that you administer at your job or whatever. That's not the intention of these videos or what I'm teaching here. I probably should mention what this little thing is. This is not part of a Norstar system. This is an old, I think it's from the 90s. It's a caller ID box. So back when caller ID first became available for telephone service, when telephones with built-in caller ID were new and people didn't have them yet, if you wanted to take advantage of caller ID without having to buy all new phones, you could buy this thing. It connects to the telephone line, and when the phone rings, after about one full ring, it displays the caller ID, the telephone number, and the name associated with that number. So yeah, I actually have this little thing plugged into the telephone line, and then the PBX actually connects to the output port of this thing. because older Norstar systems, such as mine, do not have caller ID functionality. So this little thing provides that. It runs on a 9-volt battery, and it's got the ability to store, I think, up to 99 calls. So when a call comes in, it's stored in a log. You can review the log with these two buttons and delete entries from the log after you have viewed them. And yeah, just the 3 buttons and a 9-volt battery, and that's all you need. We haven't used this thing in probably 15 years. We just didn't need to once we got our first caller ID phone. So yeah, this has been sitting in a box for 15 years, but now I have it set back up again. So although I talked about this in a previous installment, I will give a quick overview again of how everything connects. So you've got the PBX here, and when you open the door to the PBX, and I'll just stand it up on the door there. So in the 2 smaller Norstar systems, the 3x8 and the 6x16, which is what I have, your outside lines are at these RJ11 jacks. So you can take your outside line and just plug it right in. There you can see the cable which goes to the outside line that we have running into the house. And yeah, it's as easy as that. Just plug your outside line in. In the 3 larger Norstar systems, the 8x24, the compact ICS, and the modular ICS, they actually have an RJ21 connector, which is this thing that's used to connect to the outside lines. So all Norstar systems have this RJ21 connector, which is used to connect to the Norstar phones and to any other accessory devices that you have connecting to the PBX. So that could be a background music system, an external paging amplifier, stuff like that. They all connect to this RJ21 cable, and on the larger Norstar systems, they have a second RJ21 connector that's used for the outside lines. So speaking of this RJ21 connector, all our phones and everything else I mentioned comes in through this connector. This is a 50-wire connector, so it has 25 pairs. And basically, each Norstar phone is connected to 1 pair, so 2 wires. And Norstar phones, they don't need an external power connection or anything like that. They're actually powered through the PBX. So power and data goes through each pair of wires for each phone. So each phone's connected to 2 wires of this RJ21 connector, and it's non-polarized. You can hook the phones up either way and you won't hurt anything. They'll run whichever way you hook them up, non-polarized, so that's quite nice. Now here for illustrative purposes, I have an ordinary telephone line that's been terminated on one end with this female RJ11 jack, and at the other end it's just bare wires. So a telephone cable has 4 wires coming out of it, and the colors are standardized: yellow, green, red, and black. And this is what runs into your house from the telephone company, from the central office, pretty much. Now, ordinary POTS telephone service, plain old telephone service, is what POTS stands for. You only need 2 wires to connect to the phone. The reason a telephone cord has 4 wires is that if you needed to, you could connect 2 separate lines through 1 telephone cord. So if you were running, just as an example, if you were running a business out of your home and you needed 2 phone lines, or you needed a second phone line for a fax machine, for example, you could run 1 phone line through 2 wires and the second phone line through the other 2 wires. The green and red wires you see in the center, those make up the pair for 1 line, and the yellow and black are the pair for the other line. And as far as I know, it doesn't matter which pair you use if you're just running 1 telephone line into a house. In this particular house, the black and yellow wires have been used to run the telephone service into this house. So in most cases where, although telephone cable has 4 wires, 2 are only going to be in use at any given time in most normal use cases. Now, as far as the Norstar phones are concerned, the Norstar phones connect to the PBS through ordinary telephone wire. If I zoom in here, you might be able to see a white telephone wire leading from each phone, which I've nicely routed using zip ties down the length of the shelf there. So yeah, just ordinary telephone line that terminates in an RJ11 jack, plugs into the phone, and at the other end I cut the wires and soldered them onto the appropriate bare wires of the RJ21 cable that connects to the PBX. And as far as the Norstar phones are concerned, I actually forget if it matters which pair of wires you use or not. All I can say is that I use the red and green pair, and that's what worked for me. So I use the red and green wires to connect to the RJ21 cable into the PBX. As for finding out what wires on the RJ21 cable do what, that's explained in the Norstar manual. So here I have the Norstar 6x16 installation and coordination manual open here. And they have a nice table in here explaining what color wires of the RJ21 cable, what they correspond to. So as I said, the RJ21 cable has 25 pairs, so 50 wires, and each pair goes to each entity, be it a phone or background music connection or an external paging connection. So in this example here, now you may remember that my two phones here, the white one is connected as extension 21 and the black phone's connected as extension 31. So if I want to call the black phone from the white one, I dial 31 and it'll call the black phone. So on the smaller Norstar systems, the extension numbers are pretty much hard-coded to what pair of wires you use on the RJ21 cable. You can change what the extension numbers are through the configuration menus in the Norstar system, but by default they have a specific setup. In the case of the 6x16, set 21 is to be connected to the pair of wires that's white with blue stripes and blue with white stripes. So those two wires of those particular colors make up a pair, and you connect your Norstar phone to that pair, and that phone will be on extension number 21. And once again, as I said before, it's not polarized, so you don't have to connect the green telephone wire to one wire and the red to the other, or the other way around. It works both ways. And then of course we go down here to set 31, and set 31 is on black with blue stripes and blue with black stripes, and you can see how the color combination works out here. So it's not that complicated to do. As long as you have a table like this, you're good to go for figuring out what you want to connect your phones to. And if we go down here, some of the pairs aren't used for the 6x16. And here we get the auxiliary functionality, one pair used for an external pager. Actually, two pairs are used for an external pager, one for the actual audio signal and one for the control signal that activates the external pager. You have a pair for an auxiliary ringer and a pair for the background music source, which I actually have wired up for my system. I have a 3.5mm connector going into that pair, which as you can see is violet with slate or gray stripes, or gray with violet stripes. So there you go. That's pretty much all you need to know to connect your Norstar phones to a Norstar PBX, and it's really not that hard. The hardest part is just dealing with the super fine gauge wire. As I've mentioned before, how professionals do it is they use a special punch down block, and there's a few types of punch down block. One's called a BIX block, B-I-X. One's called a 66 block, one's called a 110 block. Kind of weird names for all of them. But yeah, those are special. They're called punch down blocks. You use a special tool to basically punch the wire onto the contacts. But those things are pretty expensive to get a hold of. Punch down blocks and the tools, the punch down tools, are quite expensive to buy. But you don't need to do that. All I did was I carefully stripped the appropriate wires, soldered them together, and wrapped electrical tape around them. And I thought it would be quite delicate, but a year and a half later, I have not had to repair any connections. Nothing's broken. So yeah, you can do that and it'll work just fine. Of course, I only have two phones and background music hooked up. If you had a lot more phones hooked up, it might get a bit messy without using a punch down block. But for small installations like a hobbyist would normally do, just go ahead and solder the wires and it'll work just fine. Another alternative is to use splice connectors. Like someone once mentioned to me that 3M makes what's called a butt splice connector. You basically just shove the wire into the connector, turn a nut, and it automatically splices the wire into the connector. So that's a way of connecting two really fine gauge wires together. So yeah, a lot of alternatives without having to buy expensive telecom industry equipment. And as you can see here, the Norstar cabinet has these nice cable captivity rings here that you can feed all the cables through to keep it all nice and neat. And the front door of the cabinet has this space here for the cables to come out of. So nice little cable management routine there. Now, something that I should probably mention, if you're going to connect your Norstar system to an outside line, is you need to be aware of the ringer equivalence number, or REN, of the Norstar system and any other equipment that you may have connected to your telephone line. So if we look right here on the label, it says ringer equivalence 2.5B. What the heck does that mean, and why is it important at all? Well, your telephone line can only handle so many telephones connected to it before the load on the line becomes too great and things stop working. If you have too many telephones connected to your telephone line, one thing that can, for example, happen is that your telephones won't ring when somebody calls you because the load is too much, that there's not enough voltage to activate the ringing circuitry on your phones. Telephone service uses quite a high voltage to ring your phones. It's about 90 volts AC at 25 hertz, and that's what's used to ring your phones. It's such a high voltage because back in the day, when the original telephones had mechanical bells that rang when somebody called you, you needed that much voltage to activate the solenoid that rang the bells. And if there's not enough voltage there, there's not going to be enough power to activate the solenoid to ring the bells. Now, today's modern telephones that have electronic ringers, they don't need that voltage to ring the phones because it's all externally powered, and with cordless phones, they're powered by batteries that obviously power the ringer and stuff like that. But they use the high voltage as a signal to ring the phone, and still, if the voltage is too low, it's not going to trigger the phone to begin ringing. So there's a certain limit to how much you can load down your telephone line, and that's where ringer equivalence number comes in. It's basically an arbitrary measurement of how much load a device places on your phone line. And in North America, all telephones and associated equipment have to have a ringer equivalence number on them as a way to convey how much load they place on your telephone line. The standard here in North America is that all the equipment you have hooked up to your telephone line can't add up to more than 5, a ringer equivalence number of 5. Now, as a standard, a Western Electric 500 telephone, which is, the quintessential rotary phone that was made for decades, that's used as the ringer equivalence standard. A Western Electric 500 telephone has a ringer equivalence of 1. That's the standard. And different telephones will be lower or higher, just depending on their design. I've heard of some European telephones with mechanical bell ringers having ringer equivalents as high as like 3.7, which is a really strong load. In contrast, today's modern telephones, cordless phones and such, they'll have a ringer equivalence as low as 0.1, just because, they don't need any power. And then things like answering machines, or that little box that I showed you that gives the caller ID, they literally have a ringer equivalence of 0.0, because they don't ring at all. They don't make use of the ringing signal except to know when to display caller ID. So the reason I bring this all up is that you should be aware that the Norstar system, at least my Norstar system, has a ringer equivalence of 2.5. That's a very heavy load. So beware if you have many telephones on your telephone line already. Take a look at them. Look on the bottom of the phones. They should all have ringer equivalence number on them. And just make sure that adding the Norstar system doesn't make everything add up to more than 5. So I was a bit concerned with that because we already have 3 cordless telephones hooked up in this house. I don't know why we have 3 cordless telephones. We only use 1, but we have 3 hooked up, and an answering machine. But I took a look at all of them. All 3 cordless phones that we have a ringer equivalence of 0.1. The answering machine has a ringer equivalence of 0.0, and that caller ID box has a ringer equivalence of 0.0. So that's a total of only 0.3, maximum's 5. So adding another 2.5 with this system is not going to hurt anything at all. So that's just a little good thing to check before you hook your Norstar system up to an outside line. So you've wired everything up, you've powered up your Norstar system for the first time, it's initialized to the factory default settings. What do you do now? Where do you start? What can you do right off the bat to start playing with things? Well, the first thing you want to do is actually set the display contrast, because by default, Norstar initializes all the phones at the lowest display contrast, and that means you're not going to be able to see anything at all on the display unless you look at it at an angle like that, and then you'll be able to see. So to change the display contrast on a Norstar phone, it's Feature *7. And you can see on this Norstar M7310 phone, which has a dual line display, you can use the soft keys to change the contrast. And then you can hit OK. So that's that set. Now, on the more pedestrian Norstar 7208 phone, you don't have soft keys, so you hit Feature *7, and you actually use the number keys to set the contrast. 3, 2, 1, and 4 is the highest. And when you're done, you can just hit Release. On Norstar phones, Release is your catch-all, get me out of here, exit, quit, whatever you want button. Whenever you want to, go back, exit a function or exit a menu or whatever you're doing, Release is the button to do that. When you're on a call, Release is also what you can use to hang up the call. When the receiver's off the hook, you can hang up a call just by hanging up to the receiver, but if you're in hands-free mode, you can hang up the call just by hitting Release. And you can also use Release while you're using the receiver, just so the caller doesn't hear the loud plastic crackling noise of hanging it up. So it's just a nicer way to end a call. Or a page. I kind of laugh whenever I'm in a store and somebody makes a page using their PBX phone system, and they end the page by hanging the receiver up, and you get this loud scratching, crackling over the speakers, where all they would have to do is hit the Release button to end the page, and then hang the receiver up, so you get a nice clean break from the page. So once you've got the contrast set on all your phones so you can see what's going on the display, you can start playing around with stuff. So there's a specific factory default configuration that Norstar systems place on all the phones upon initialization. If it's being turned on for the first time, or it's being powered on after being without power for 3 days. A Norstar system can hold its programming for 3 days without power. After that, the memory is erased and everything is set back to the defaults, and you have to reconfigure it again. It may be different for other Norstar systems, but I know on the 6x16, by default, lines 1 and 2 are made available, and 2 intercom buttons are made available. Lines 1 and 2 are on these 2 keys, and the 2 intercom buttons are on these 2 keys. As you can see, I've programmed one key, the bottom key here, to be hands-free, but in the default configuration, hands-free is totally disabled. You get the 2 intercom buttons instead. So from the get-go, you have the ability to make calls either internally or externally. External calls you make using the line keys and then dialing the number. Or for internal calls, you press an intercom key and then dial the extension number of the phone you want to call. It may be a little confusing. It was to me at first. I had no idea what intercom meant or why a Norstar phone would have more than one intercom button. the definition of the word intercom that I always had in my head was, for example, what you get in a school, so that the office could page a classroom and ask the teacher to send Jimmy to the office because he's pooped on the floor again or whatever. That's what I always thought of as intercom. But in the context of the Norstar system and office telephone systems in general, intercom literally means internal communications. It's what you use for calling another phone on the PBX. So as opposed to calling on the outside line, intercom is just for calling another extension on the PBX. So in the default programming on a Norstar system, when you lift the receiver, you're actually not going to get a dial tone. You're not going to get anything. The system's not going to do anything. Now, if you listen on my unit here, I do get a dial tone when I lift the receiver, because I've programmed my system to, by default, go to an intercom when I lift the receiver. So you can see when I lift the receiver, one of the intercom buttons light up. I've programmed my system to do that by default, so I lift up the handset and I just immediately hear a dial tone, which is nice. But by default, it's not going to do that. You lift the receiver and you get nothing. So in making your first call to an internal phone, you have to lift the receiver and then press one of the two intercom buttons. And I should mention that because these programmable buttons are programmable, obviously from a default configuration, these buttons are probably going to be wrong. These are keycaps that can be removed and replaced with whatever you want. So like I said, the last two buttons here are going to be intercom buttons, where on mine I have an intercom up here and a hands-free down here. They're programmable buttons. You program them to do what you want, and then you pull off the keycap and put the appropriate new keycap in its place. So the keycaps may be different depending on, just what already is installed on your phone. But the default configuration, at least for the 6x16, is going to be lines 1 and 2 here, 2 intercom buttons here, and no hands-free. So to make your first internal call, you can lift the receiver, hit an intercom button, and then hit the extension number for the other phone. In my case, this phone here is on extension 31. So I dial 31, and the other phone begins ringing. And you can lift up the receiver on the other phone, and now you're on a call. And you can see on the display there, it says we're talking to set 21. And on this one, we're connected to set 31. So there, you've made your first internal call on your Norstar system. And to end the call, you just hang up and do the same for the other. Now in the default configuration, when you hit an intercom button without lifting the receiver, it might look like you have hands-free functionality because the dial tone comes out of the loudspeaker here. However, it's not full hands-free. You'll be able to hear the other party on the loudspeaker, but the hands-free microphone is not activated. So you'll be able to hear them, but they won't be able to hear you until you go into the settings and you program full hands-free functionality into one of the programmable buttons. And as I said before, you can program Norstar to do something automatically when you lift the receiver, either automatically open an intercom line or automatically open one of the outside lines. And I have mine configured to automatically open an intercom line when I pick up the receiver. So some other basic features I'll demonstrate here. You can hold a call, of course. So let me call the other phone again. Alright, so there's now I'm going to mute this microphone before I get feedback. I'll mute both the microphones here. So we're now on a call with both phones, and you can hold a call, either internal or external calls. You can hold the line. So I press hold, you're back to the time and date, and the line that you're holding, its indicator blinks to let you know that it's held. The rapid blinking means that the call is on hold. Whereas for the other phone, which is being held, the intercom indicator here is lit steadily because I haven't put it on hold. But on this phone, I can press the hold button as well, and the indicator is flashing to let you know that the intercom line is on hold. To bring the call off of hold, you just press the appropriate line that the indicator is telling you is on hold. And we're off hold now. And do the same for the other one. And now we're off hold. Pressing hold again doesn't seem to work. I press hold again and it doesn't do it. And that's sort of the smart way to do it, because you could be holding multiple calls on multiple lines simultaneously. For example, while I have this intercom call on hold, I can make a call to an outside line. There I'll open line 2. You don't hear a dial tone because I don't have anything hooked up to line 2. And yeah, I can go ahead and make a call on line 2 while I have this intercom call on hold. And I can hold more than one call simultaneously as well. While I'm on this call on line 2, I'm going to hold that as well. So now I've got 2 lines on hold. I've got outside line 2 and this intercom call on hold. I go back to the line 2 call by pressing the button, and I'm going to end the call by hitting release. And I'm going to go back to my intercom call. So now I'm back to the call with this phone right here, and I'm going to hang up by pressing release on this. And the call has ended, and that is indicated on both phones. And of course, it probably doesn't need to be said, but to make an outside call, I'll hit line 1 here, which is the line actually going to the telephone service running into this house. So we have a dial tone that's being generated by the central office here. And yeah, it's as simple as opening the line, punching in the number, and you make your call. I can mention, of course, that if one person is on a call with an outside line, that outside line isn't available for anyone else to use anymore. It's currently being in use. So while I'm on the call with line 2, you can see on this phone, the indicator lights up for line 2. Now notice I have a line 3 button here, but this is line 2. That's because I don't have another line 2 button. But you can see while this phone's on a call with line 2, this indicator lights up for other phones, for all the other phones that have access to line 2, to let you know that, hey, you can't use line 2 right now, somebody else is using it. And you can see if I try to use the line by pressing the button, the phone says line in use. As for intercom functionality, every Norstar phone can have up to 2 intercom keys, so you can make up to 2 intercom calls at one time. So let me call the other phone again. So I'm now on one intercom call with the other phone, but what I can do is I can hit another intercom key, and you can see hitting the other intercom key makes the first call automatically go on hold. I can make a second intercom call while I'm on another intercom call with the other phone. Something else I can show is that if I am on 2 intercom calls simultaneously, and I'm going to lift the receiver just to make it quieter. So I'm on 2 intercom calls simultaneously, but you'll see on this phone that this upper intercom key isn't lit. It's still available for use. And you'll see if I put our first intercom call on hold right now, it too, can make a second intercom call simultaneously. So now we're technically on 3 simultaneous intercom calls. These 2 phones are on one call with each other, but then each phone is on a separate second intercom call. And that's because although each Norstar phone can only make up to 2 intercom calls simultaneously, the Norstar system itself can make a virtually infinite number of simultaneous intercom calls. It can support as many intercom calls as there are for phones to use. So for this Norstar system that can handle up to 16 phones, it can handle however many number of intercom calls that permutates to 16 phones. So there's no limitation there. There's just the 2 intercom limitation per phone. Further to this, I should mention that I can be on more than one outside line call simultaneously. I can open a call on line 2. I'm now on a call with someone on line 2 and hold it. And I can open up line 1 and make a call on line 1 as well. So there's the basics to setting up and using for the first time in the default configuration your Norstar system. We've gone over how to attach outside lines, how to attach internal phones, how to look in the installation manual and see what wires you want to connect your phones to get the appropriate extension numbers. And we've gone through how the system is set up from the factory default settings, what functions are available to you right off the bat, and how to use the basic most functions to test and play around with your system before you go through with programming it and setting it all up to work how you like. Making internal calls, making outside calls, holding calls, and making more than one call simultaneously, as well as how to set the display contrast, which is a little annoying thing you have to do right off the bat. So in future installments, one or more installments, I don't know how many it'll be, I'll go through how to use the more fancy features of your Norstar system, paging, call transferring, conference calls, do not disturb, voice calls, all that sort of stuff. And eventually I'll also get into how to configure your Norstar system, go into the configuration menus, how to set things in the configuration menus, what everything in the configuration menus is, and how to set up your Norstar system to work exactly as you'd like it to. And hopefully in the next installment of this series, I'll have some more phones to show you because I could not pass up this deal. 4 Norstar phones that the seller claims are tested working fine for the equivalent of 26 American dollars shipped. That is such a good deal for 4 phones, I could not pass it up, particularly because 2 of the phones are M7324 phones, which I don't have yet, but I've always wanted to get. They have 24 programmable buttons, which is really nice. One of the phones, interestingly, has the special ergonomic Norstar handset that's meant to be able to hang on your shoulder, I think. So that's kind of interesting, although not something I'll ever make use of. And then the other 2 phones are the newer Norstar phones. They're the Norstar T series phones that came out, I think, in the 2000s, and they were updated with bigger number pad buttons, more rounded buttons, with graphic symbols on them instead of words. And they've got these ones have quite a large number of programmable keys on them, and they have the 3 soft keys. So yeah, 4 phones for 26 American shipped, and 2 M7324s. That is a great deal. I could not pass that up. Oh, and they come with a big bag of buttons, which is so nice. Because hopefully there will be the buttons in there that I need for some of them. Like that black phone you saw has a line 3 button instead of line 2, so hopefully there's a line 2 button in there. And hopefully there's an English line 1 button for it, because that phone currently has a French line 1 button on it. So yeah, really excited to get this. It's only coming from Quebec, so hopefully it'll be in the mail. If the seller mails it out in the next couple of days, it should be here by the end of the week. So hopefully that happens, and I'll be able to demonstrate these phones for you. I'm not interested in the newer Norstar phones. I don't like the curvy design and the graphic button symbols. So I'll be selling these 2 newer phones. I'll demonstrate them just for posterity, but then I'll be selling these, and hopefully just by selling these 2 phones I can make my money back that I paid for all 4 of them, since I'll be able to show pictures of them working perfectly and stuff like that. So yeah, that should be pretty cool. And now to end this video, I'll show you a video clip I filmed for other social media right after I connected the PBX to the outside line for the first time. I made an outside call to the NIST time server in the United States. So I demonstrated calling an outside number, and I transferred it to the other phone. So you'll see that as well. And you'll also see that I have the PBX configured to use pulse dialing still instead of tone dialing, because Bell Alliant here in Atlantic Canada still supports pulse dialing. At least in my area they still do, which is awesome. So you'll get to hear the pulse dialing relay in this PBX go nuts while I dial the quite long number to get to our long distance service, and then to the NIST time server. So yeah, here's that clip, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.
Acetone, 17 hours.